I thought finding the pregnancy test would be a happy moment. Then I remembered. I had a vasectomy 4 years ago. My surgeon confirmed the procedure was successful, bilateral, permanent, conception impossible. My wife didn't know I knew. For 8 weeks, I played the excited father. I volunteered to organize her baby shower. I set up the projector myself. And when she stood in front of 40 guests expecting celebration, I showed them my medical records and asked one question she couldn't answer. My name is Nathan, and for the past 8 years, I have worked as a hospital administrator at Riverside Medical Center, where my primary responsibilities involve managing patient record systems and coordinating between various departments to ensure that documentation protocols are followed correctly and that medical information flows smoothly between physicians and billing offices and insurance providers. The work requires attention to detail and an understanding of how small errors in record keeping can cascade into significant problems for patients and providers alike, which has trained me to approach problems methodically and to verify facts before drawing conclusions or taking action that might be difficult to reverse once consequences begin to unfold. On a Tuesday morning in early September, I was preparing to leave for work, when I noticed that the bathroom trash bin was full and needed to be emptied before the bag split, and created a mess that would be more difficult to clean up later. I pulled the plastic liner from the bin and tied the top in a loose knot. And as I was carrying the bag toward the garage where we keep the larger waste containers, I noticed through the semi-transparent plastic that there was a small cardboard box near the top of the contents that had printing on it in pink and blue colors that are typically associated with pregnancy-related products. I set the bag down on the bathroom floor and untied the knot, and when I opened the bag and moved aside some wadded tissues, I found a first response pregnancy test box that had been opened and contained a used test stick that showed 2 clear pink lines in the result window indicating a positive result. I removed the box and the test stick from the trash bag and set them on the bathroom counter, and I stood looking at them for several minutes while trying to understand what I was seeing and what it meant for my marriage to my wife Elise, who I had been with for 10 years and married to for 8 years, and with whom I had 2 children who were now 6 and 4 years old. The pregnancy test was clearly positive, and the box appeared to be new based on the lack of wear on the cardboard and the brightness of the printed colors. And when I checked the small print on the box, I found a purchase receipt that had been tucked inside showing that the test had been bought 3 days earlier at a pharmacy located 2 miles from our home. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I continued to stare at the test and the box, and I realized that my first emotion was not excitement or joy about the possibility of a third child, but rather confusion. Because I remembered very clearly that 4 years ago, after our second child was born, I had undergone a vasectomy procedure at the recommendation of Elise, who had experienced difficult pregnancies both times, and who had told me that she did not want to go through another pregnancy and that she thought 2 children was the right size for our family. I had agreed with her assessment at the time because I also felt that 2 children allowed us to provide adequate attention and resources to each of them without spreading ourselves too thin financially or emotionally, and I had scheduled the vasectomy with Dr. Nora Kwan, who was a urological surgeon at Riverside Medical Center and who had performed the procedure in her clinic with local anesthesia, and had given me very clear post-operative instructions about avoiding strenuous activity for several days, and about returning for a follow-up sperm count analysis after 6 weeks to confirm that the procedure had been successful. I left the bathroom and went to my home office, where I keep a filing cabinet that contains our important medical and financial documents organized in labeled folders by year and by category. And I opened the drawer labeled Medical Records, and pulled out the folder marked Nathan Procedures, which contained documentation from several minor medical interventions I had undergone over the past decade. I found the paperwork from the vasectomy quickly because it was near the front of the folder, and I spread the documents out on my desk so that I could review them carefully and confirm what I remembered about the procedure and its outcomes. The first document was the consent form I had signed before the procedure, which included detailed descriptions of what the surgery would involve and what the expected results would be, and which stated clearly that vasectomy is intended as a permanent form of contraception, and that while reversal procedures exist, they are not guaranteed to be successful and should not be relied upon as a future option. The second document was the surgical report that Dr. Kwan had dictated immediately after the procedure, which described the steps she had taken to locate and cut and cauterize the VS deferens tubes on both sides, and which noted that the procedure had been completed without complications and that both tubes had been successfully occluded. The third document was the laboratory report from my 6-week follow-up appointment, which showed that my sperm count had been tested and found to be 0 with no motile sperm detected in the sample, which meant that the vasectomy had been completely successful and that I was effectively sterile from that point forward. I took out my phone and photographed each of these documents using the camera's document scanning feature that adjusts contrast and perspective to create clear, readable images, and then I arranged the 3 pages side by side on my desk and placed that morning's newspaper next to them so that the date was clearly visible in the frame, and I took several photographs of this arrangement from different angles to ensure that at least one image would be sharp and well lit enough to serve as evidence if I needed to prove when these documents had been photographed and what they contained. I uploaded these photos to a private cloud storage account that only I had access to and that was not connected to any of the shared digital services that Elise and I use together for family photos or household documents, and I also emailed copies of the photos to my personal email account so that there would be multiple redundant backups in case one storage system failed or was somehow compromised. I returned to the bathroom and photographed the pregnancy test and its box using the same careful documentation approach, making sure to capture the positive result lines clearly and to include the purchase receipt in the frame so that the date of purchase was visible, and I placed the test and box on the counter next to that morning's newspaper and took additional photos showing all 3 items together with the date clearly readable. I saved these photos to the same private cloud storage and emailed them to myself, and then I carefully placed the pregnancy test and box back in the trash bag exactly as I had found them, and tied the bag closed and carried it out to the garage and deposited it in the larger waste container as I had originally intended to do before making the discovery. I returned to the house and went through my normal morning routine of showering and dressing for work, and when Elise emerged from the bedroom where she had been sleeping later than usual, I greeted her with a kiss and asked how she was feeling. And she said that she had been experiencing some nausea in the mornings lately and thought she might be coming down with a stomach virus that was going around at her workplace. I left for work without saying anything to Elise about what I had discovered in the bathroom trash, and during my commute to Riverside Medical Center, I found myself running through various scenarios in my mind about what the positive pregnancy test could mean and what explanations might exist beyond the obvious conclusion that Elise had been unfaithful and had become pregnant by another man. I considered the possibility that the test might have belonged to someone else who had visited our home recently, but I could not think of any female guests we had entertained in the past week, aside from Elise's sister Mara, who was unmarried and had not mentioned anything about a relationship or pregnancy. I considered whether there might be some medical explanation for a false positive result, but my experience working with diagnostic testing at the hospital had taught me that modern pregnancy tests are extremely accurate when they show positive results because they detect the presence of human chorionic gonadotropin hormone that is only produced during pregnancy. When I arrived at my office, I logged into my computer and opened the hospital's internal medical records database, and I navigated to the section where I could access my own patient file, since hospital policy allowed employees to review their own medical information through the system. I found the records from my vasectomy procedure and confirmed that everything matched the paper documents I had photographed that morning, and I also noticed that Dr. Kwan had included detailed notes about the post-operative sperm count analysis, which stated explicitly that 0 sperm had been detected and that the patient should be considered sterile for purposes of family planning decisions. I printed a copy of these electronic records and took the printout to Dr. Kwan's office on the 4th floor of the medical center, and I asked her nurse if Dr. Kwan had any availability for a brief consultation about a medical question I had regarding a procedure she had performed for me several years earlier. The nurse checked Dr. Kwan's schedule and told me that she had a 15-minute gap between patient appointments at 11 o'clock, and I returned to my office to work on routine administrative tasks until it was time for the appointment. When I met with Dr. Kwan, I explained that I was reviewing my medical records and wanted to confirm my understanding of the vasectomy procedure and its permanence, and I asked her whether there was any possibility that the procedure could have failed or reversed itself spontaneously in the 4 years since it had been performed. Dr. Kwan looked at me with a slightly puzzled expression and asked whether I was experiencing any symptoms or concerns that had prompted this question, and I told her that I simply wanted to understand the medical facts about the reliability of vasectomy as a contraceptive method. Dr. Kwan pulled up my electronic medical file on her office computer and reviewed the surgical notes and the post-operative laboratory results, and she told me that the procedure I had undergone was a bilateral vasectomy in which both vas deferens tubes had been cut and cauterized, and that the 6-week sperm count had confirmed that no sperm were present in my ejaculate. She explained that while spontaneous recanalization of the vas deferens is theoretically possible, it is extremely rare and typically occurs within the first few months after surgery rather than years later, and that in any case such a reversal would be detected by the presence of sperm in a repeat semen analysis. She told me that based on my surgical records and post-operative testing, I should be considered permanently sterile, and that the likelihood of my partner becoming pregnant through intercourse with me was essentially 0. I thanked Dr. Kwan for her time and asked whether she would be willing to provide a written statement confirming what she had just told me, and I explained that I needed documentation of my sterility for personal legal purposes that I preferred not to discuss in detail. Dr. Kwan said that she could provide a letter summarizing my medical history with her and confirming the success of the vasectomy procedure, and she dictated a brief statement while I waited in her office and then printed it on her official letterhead and signed it and handed it to me in a sealed envelope. The letter stated that I had undergone a bilateral vasectomy on a specific date 4 years earlier, and that post-operative testing had confirmed azoospermia with 0 sperm count, and that based on her medical judgment, I should be considered permanently sterile with no reasonable possibility of causing pregnancy through natural conception. I returned to my office and scanned Dr. Kwan's letter using the document scanner on my desk, and I saved the scanned image to the same private cloud storage where I had placed the photographs of the pregnancy test and the vasectomy records. I then opened the shared digital calendar that Elise and I maintained together for coordinating our family schedules and our individual work commitments, and I began scrolling backward through the past several weeks looking for any patterns or entries that might help me understand when and how Elise might have become pregnant and who might be responsible for her condition. The calendar showed numerous entries for Elise's work meetings and appointments, and I noticed that there were 3 entries per week labeled personal training that were scheduled for early morning hours before Elise normally left for her job as a corporate wellness coordinator at a mid-sized company that managed employee fitness and health programs for various client organizations. I had known that Elise had been working with a personal trainer for the past 6 months because she had mentioned it several times and had told me that her employer encouraged wellness staff to participate in fitness activities so that they could better understand and promote the programs they were selling to client companies. I had not paid much attention to these training sessions because they seemed like a normal part of Elise's job responsibilities, and because she had always returned from them in time to help get our children ready for school before she left for her office. I opened the banking application on my computer and logged into our joint checking account to review recent transactions, and I searched for charges that might be related to personal training or gym memberships. I found a series of 15 charges over the past 6 months that were each for $120 and that were labeled as coming from a business called Vance Fitness Studio, which I did not recognize as the name of any gym that we had memberships with. I clicked on one of the charges to view the full transaction details, and I saw that the merchant information included a physical address and a phone number and the name Derek Vance listed as the account holder. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Derek Vance Fitness Studio, and found a professional website that advertised personal training services and corporate wellness programs. And the site included a biography page with a photograph of a man in his mid-30s who had an athletic build and an easy smile and who was described as the owner and lead trainer of the studio. I clicked through several pages of the website and noticed that there was a section devoted to corporate wellness partnerships that listed several local companies, including the name of Elise's employer, which suggested that Derek Vance had some kind of professional relationship with the organization where Elise worked, and that the personal training sessions might have begun as part of that business connection. I took screenshots of Derek's biography page and the corporate partnerships page and the merchant information from our banking records, and I saved all of these images to my private cloud storage alongside the other documentation I had been collecting. I then opened the shared fitness tracking application that Elise and I both used to log our exercise activities and to share our progress with each other as a form of mutual encouragement, and I navigated to Elise's activity history to see what information she had recorded about her personal training sessions. The fitness app showed that Elise had logged dozens of training sessions over the past 6 months, and each entry included a timestamp and a location tag that used the phone's GPS to record where the activity had taken place. I scrolled through the list of sessions and noticed that most of them showed a location corresponding to the address of Vance Fitness Studio that I had found on Derek's website, which seemed consistent with Elise's story about working with a personal trainer at his facility. However, as I continued scrolling backward through the history, I found 3 entries from mid-June that showed a different location tag, and when I clicked on these entries to view the map, I saw that the GPS coordinates corresponded to an address that was several miles away from the gym and that appeared to be a residential condominium complex based on the satellite imagery that the map application displayed. I copied the address from the fitness app and searched for it in a real estate database, and I found a listing for a 2-bedroom condominium unit in a modern building that had been sold 3 years earlier to a buyer whose name was listed as Derek Vance in the public property records. I sat at my desk staring at the property records on my computer screen and trying to process the implications of what I had discovered, which was that Elise had logged 3 separate fitness training sessions at Derek Vance's residential condominium address during a period in mid-June when I had been traveling out of state for a hospital administrators conference that had required me to be away from home for 5 consecutive days. I opened my email archives and searched for my travel confirmation messages from that conference, and I found the hotel reservation and flight bookings that confirmed I had departed on June 12th and had returned on June 16th, which meant that I had been completely absent from our home during the precise time period when those 3 condominium training sessions had occurred. I navigated back to the shared fitness app and examined the 3 entries more carefully, and I noted that the first session was logged on June 13th at 6:30 in the morning and had lasted for 90 minutes according to the duration field that Elise had entered, and the second session was logged on June 14th at the same time with the same duration, and the third session was logged on June 15th also at 6:30 in the morning. The consistency of the timing suggested that these were not random or spontaneous visits, but rather were scheduled appointments that followed the same pattern as the training sessions that Elise logged at the actual gym location, which made it appear as though she had simply transferred her normal workout routine to a different location during the week when I was traveling. I opened a pregnancy calculator website that I found through a medical reference search, and I entered the current date and worked backward to estimate what the conception date would need to be in order for a pregnancy test to show positive results in early September. The calculator suggested that conception would have occurred approximately 8 weeks earlier, which would place it in mid-July rather than mid-June, and for a moment I felt a slight relief that perhaps the condominium training sessions were not directly connected to the pregnancy timeline. However, I then realized that I needed to know more information about when Elise had actually discovered she was pregnant, and whether the positive test I had found represented the first time she had tested, or whether she might have known about the pregnancy for several weeks before taking the test that I had discovered in the trash. I returned to the shared digital calendar and looked for any appointments that might be related to pregnancy or prenatal care, and I found 3 entries that had been added to the calendar within the past 2 weeks that were labeled as doctor appointments with a physician whose name I did not recognize. I searched for the physician's name online and discovered that she was an obstetrician who practiced at a women's health clinic on the other side of town from where our regular family doctor had her office, and I wondered why Elise would have chosen to see a new physician rather than continuing with the doctor who had managed her previous 2 pregnancies. I clicked on the first calendar entry to view the details, and I saw that the appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning, and that Elise had marked it as a private appointment, with a note that said she would be working from home that day. I looked at the other 2 appointment entries and saw that they were scheduled for subsequent weeks at similar times, and all 3 were marked as private with notes about working from home, which suggested that Elise did not want to discuss these appointments with me or to coordinate our schedules around them in the way that we normally did for medical visits or other significant personal commitments. I took screenshots of all 3 calendar entries showing the appointment dates and times and the private markings, and I saved these images to my private cloud storage along with the growing collection of documentation that I had assembled over the course of the morning. I checked the time and realized that it was nearly 1 o'clock in the afternoon and that I had spent most of my workday investigating my wife's activities rather than attending to my normal administrative responsibilities. And I decided that I needed to take a break from the research and focus on completing some of the routine tasks that were waiting for my attention. I worked steadily for the next 3 hours, reviewing budget reports and responding to emails and attending a brief meeting with department heads about upcoming changes to our records management software. And during this time, I found that concentrating on ordinary work problems helped to calm the anxiety and confusion that had been building in my chest since I had found the pregnancy test that morning. When I left the hospital at 6 o'clock to drive home, I stopped at a coffee shop near our neighborhood and sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to decide whether I was going to confront Elise immediately about what I had discovered, or whether I was going to continue gathering information before having any direct conversation with her about the pregnancy and its implications. I thought about how she had looked that morning when she had mentioned feeling nauseous and had attributed it to a stomach virus, and I realized that she was actively concealing the pregnancy from me rather than simply waiting for the right moment to share happy news, and this realization made me feel that confronting her before I had complete documentation of her activities would give her an opportunity to construct a narrative that might be difficult for me to disprove later if our marriage ended in divorce and custody disputes. I decided that I would return home and act normally and supportively, and would not reveal anything about what I had learned until I had gathered enough evidence to make the situation completely clear and undeniable to everyone who might eventually need to understand what had happened in our marriage. I drove the remaining distance to our house and parked in the driveway, and when I entered through the front door, I found Elise in the kitchen preparing dinner while our 2 children sat at the table working on coloring books and homework assignments. I greeted everyone warmly and asked the children about their day at school, and they both launched into animated descriptions of playground activities and art projects and conflicts with classmates that required parental mediation and reassurance. Elise turned from the stove where she was stirring a pot of pasta sauce and smiled at me, and she asked how my day had been and whether anything interesting had happened at the hospital. I told her that it had been a routine day, filled with budget reviews and software planning meetings, and I asked whether she was feeling any better than she had been that morning when she had complained of nausea. She said that the nausea had passed after she had eaten some crackers and had drunk some ginger tea, and she mentioned again that she thought there was a stomach virus circulating at her workplace and that several of her coworkers had been out sick recently with similar symptoms. I offered to help with dinner preparations and began setting the table while Elise finished cooking, and during the meal I participated in the usual family conversations about school activities and weekend plans and various minor household issues that needed attention. After dinner, I helped the children with their evening routines of bathing and teeth brushing and story time, and when I tucked them into their beds, I felt a deep sadness about the fact that the family structure they had always known was almost certainly going to be disrupted in ways that would be confusing and painful for them, regardless of how carefully I tried to manage the process of separating from their mother. I went to the bedroom where Elise was already lying in bed, reading something on her phone, and I changed into sleep clothes and climbed into bed beside her and told her that I was exhausted from a long day at work and needed to get some rest. She set her phone on the nightstand and turned off her bedside lamp, and she moved closer to me and rested her head on my shoulder in the way she often did when she wanted physical closeness without conversation, and I put my arm around her and lay still in the darkness, trying to reconcile the warmth of her body against mine with the knowledge that she was carrying another man's child and was deliberately deceiving me about the circumstances of her pregnancy. I waited until I heard her breathing become slow and regular in a way that indicated she had fallen asleep, and then I carefully extracted myself from her embrace and got out of bed and went to the home office where I closed the door and turned on the desk lamp. I opened my laptop and began creating a detailed timeline document that would help me organize all of the evidence I had collected and would make it easier to see patterns and gaps in the information that I needed to fill in before I could take any definitive action. I created a simple spreadsheet with columns for dates and locations and evidence sources and notes, and I began entering information from the photographs and screenshots that I had saved to my private cloud storage throughout the day. The timeline showed that Elise had been working with Derek Vance as a personal trainer since early March based on the first banking transaction I had found, and that she had maintained a consistent schedule of 3 sessions per week at his fitness studio until mid-June, when she had logged 3 sessions at his residential condominium during my travel absence. After my return from the conference, the training sessions had resumed at the gym location and had continued through the present with the same 3 per week frequency, and the banking records showed that charges of $120 had been processed after each session without any gaps or irregularities that might suggest the relationship had been interrupted or terminated at any point. I spent 2 hours that evening working on the timeline spreadsheet and cross-referencing different sources of information to ensure that I had accurate dates and locations for each piece of evidence I had collected, and by the time I finished, I had a document that showed a clear pattern of weekly contact between Elise and Derek Vance extending over a 6-month period with a notable cluster of residential visits during the exact time frame when I had been absent from home on business travel. I saved the spreadsheet to my private cloud storage and also printed a hard copy that I placed in a locked drawer in my desk where Elise would not accidentally discover it if she came into the office looking for stamps or envelopes or other household supplies that we kept in the desk organizers. The following morning, I woke early and checked my phone to find several notifications from the shared digital calendar indicating that Elise had added a new entry for that afternoon labeled as a meeting with her supervisor about an upcoming corporate wellness event that her company was planning for one of their major clients. I noted the time of the meeting and the fact that it was scheduled to last for 2 hours, and I wondered whether this was a legitimate work commitment or whether it was another cover story that would allow Elise to spend time with Derek without having to account for her whereabouts to me. I got ready for work and went through the morning routine of helping get the children fed and dressed and transported to their schools. And throughout this process, I maintained the same calm and supportive demeanor that I had adopted the previous evening when I had decided not to confront Elise until I had complete documentation. When I arrived at my office at the hospital, I found a message waiting for me from the Legal Services Department asking whether I could attend a brief meeting about updates to patient privacy policies and records retention requirements that were being implemented in response to new state regulations. I replied that I could attend the meeting, and I spent the next hour sitting in a conference room listening to attorneys explain various technical details about how we would need to modify our documentation procedures to ensure compliance with the new rules. During the meeting, I found myself thinking about how the same principles of careful documentation and evidence preservation that were being discussed in the context of patient records could be applied to my personal situation, and I realized that I needed to approach my investigation of Elise's activities with the same systematic rigor that I would apply to auditing a hospital department's record-keeping practices. After the legal meeting concluded, I returned to my office and opened my laptop and navigated to the website for Derek Vance's fitness studio, and I spent time reading through the various pages that described his training philosophy and his credentials and his approach to working with clients on fitness and wellness goals. I noticed that there was a section of the website devoted to testimonials from satisfied clients, and I clicked through several of these, reading the enthusiastic descriptions of how Derek had helped various people transform their bodies and their attitudes about exercise and nutrition. Most of the testimonials included first names only and did not provide enough identifying information for me to determine whether any of the clients were people I might be able to contact to ask about their experiences working with Derek. I navigated to Derek's social media profiles and began scrolling through his public posts looking for any content that might reveal details about his personal life or his relationships with clients beyond the professional training context. His posts were primarily focused on fitness motivation and workout tips and photographs of himself demonstrating various exercises or posing with clients who had achieved significant fitness milestones. And the tone of the content was consistently upbeat and encouraging in a way that suggested he was skilled at building rapport with people and making them feel supported in their efforts to improve their health. I noticed that many of his posts included comments from female clients who used language that seemed unusually affectionate and personal for what should have been professional trainer-client relationships, with several women posting heart emojis and comments about how Derek had changed their lives and how grateful they were to have him as their coach and mentor. I took screenshots of several posts that included these effusive comments and saved them to my private cloud storage, and I also made note of the usernames of the women who had posted the most enthusiastic responses because I thought it might be useful to investigate whether any of them had experienced similar situations to what I was currently dealing with in my own marriage. I spent another 30 minutes scrolling through Derek's social media content going back several months, and during this review, I found a post from early June that showed Derek standing in front of a mountain vista with a caption about taking time for personal retreat and reflection, and the location tag on the post indicated that it had been made from a resort area about 2 hours north of our city. I opened a new browser tab and searched my own social media accounts to see whether Elise had posted anything during that same time frame, and I found a post from June 14th that showed a photograph of a mountain landscape with a caption about enjoying nature and taking time for self-care during a wellness retreat weekend. The photograph in Elise's post appeared to have been taken from a similar vantage point as the one in Derek's post, and although neither post explicitly mentioned the other person or suggested that they had been together at the location, the timing and the visual similarity of the images made it clear that they had been at the same mountain resort during the same weekend. I felt my heart rate increase as I looked at the two posts side by side on my computer screen, and I realized that this was the first piece of evidence that directly connected Elise and Derek in a context that went beyond the professional training relationship, and that suggested they had traveled together to a romantic destination for what appeared to be a couple's getaway disguised as individual wellness activities. I took screenshots of both posts, including the dates and location tags and the captions, and I saved these images to my private cloud storage alongside the other documentation I had been accumulating. I checked the time and saw that it was nearly noon, and I remembered that Elise had a calendar entry for a meeting with her supervisor that afternoon that was supposed to last for 2 hours, starting at 1 o'clock. I decided that I would use the shared fitness tracking app to monitor whether Elise's location during that time period matched her stated plan of being at her office for a work meeting, and I opened the app on my phone and enabled the real-time location sharing feature that Elise and I had both agreed to use several years earlier when we had decided that it would be helpful for coordinating family logistics and ensuring that we could find each other quickly in case of emergencies. The app showed that Elise's current location was at her workplace address where she had been since arriving that morning, and I set a reminder on my phone to check the app again at 1:30 to see whether she remained at that location during her scheduled meeting time or whether she traveled somewhere else. I spent the next hour working on routine administrative tasks and reviewing budget reports, and when my phone alarm sounded at 1:30, I immediately opened the fitness tracking app and checked Elise's location. The app showed that she was no longer at her workplace, but was instead at an address that I recognized as being the location of Derek Vance's fitness studio, and the app indicated that she had arrived at that location at 12:55, which was exactly 5 minutes before her supposed meeting with her supervisor was scheduled to begin. I took a screenshot of the location map showing Elise's phone at Derek's gym address with a timestamp that directly contradicted her calendar entry about a work meeting, and I saved this image as another piece of evidence documenting her pattern of deception about her activities and her whereabouts during times when she claimed to be engaged in legitimate work responsibilities. I continued monitoring the app throughout the afternoon, and I observed that Elise remained at Derek's location until 3:15 when the tracking showed her traveling back to her office where she stayed until 5:30 before beginning her commute home. When Elise arrived home that evening, she seemed cheerful and relaxed, and when I asked her how her meeting with her supervisor had gone, she told me that it had been very productive and that they had made good progress on planning the corporate wellness event that was scheduled for later in the month. She provided several specific details about the event, including the number of attendees expected and the activities that would be included and the vendors who would be participating, and her ability to describe the meeting so convincingly made me realize that she had probably attended a legitimate planning meeting at some earlier point and was now simply reusing details from that actual event to construct a plausible cover story for time that she had actually spent with Derek at his gym. I asked Elise whether she had gone to the gym for a training session that day in addition to her work meeting, and she looked slightly surprised by the question and said that she had not trained that day because her meeting had run longer than expected and she had not had time to fit in a workout before she needed to return to the office for other appointments. I nodded and told her that I had just been curious because I had noticed that she seemed energized and wondered whether she had been exercising, and she smiled and said that the productive work meeting had given her a sense of accomplishment that was probably responsible for her good mood. I felt a cold anger beginning to form beneath the calm exterior that I had been maintaining, and I had to consciously remind myself that confronting Elise at this moment would give her an opportunity to delete evidence or to coordinate stories with Derek before I had finished documenting the full scope of their relationship and its impact on our marriage and our family. I continued my pattern of documenting Elise's activities over the following week while maintaining a completely normal demeanor at home and avoiding any questions or comments that might alert her to the fact that I was conducting a systematic investigation of her schedule and her relationship with Derek Vance. Each morning I checked the shared fitness tracking app to see where Elise was located throughout the day, and I compared these actual locations with the appointments and meetings that she had entered into our shared calendar to see how frequently her stated plans diverged from her actual movements around the city. On 3 separate occasions during that week, I observed that she was at Derek's gym during times when her calendar showed work meetings or client site visits, and each time I took screenshots of the location data with timestamps that documented the discrepancy between her stated activities and her real whereabouts. I also began reviewing our joint credit card statements more carefully to look for charges that might provide additional evidence about Elise's activities and spending patterns, and I discovered several restaurant charges from establishments that were located near Derek's gym and that had been posted to our account during afternoon hours when Elise should have been at her office working. I cross-referenced the dates of these restaurant charges with Elise's calendar entries and with her location data from the fitness tracking app, and I found that in each case the restaurant visit had occurred on a day when Elise had logged a training session at Derek's gym and had told me that evening that she had eaten lunch at her desk while catching up on paperwork. The amounts of the restaurant charges ranged from $40 to $70, which seemed high for a single person having lunch alone, and suggested that Elise was dining with someone else and was using our joint account to pay for meals that she was sharing with Derek. During this same period, I noticed that Elise had become more attentive and affectionate toward me in ways that seemed calculated to prevent me from asking questions about her activities or expressing concerns about our relationship. She initiated physical intimacy more frequently than had been typical in recent months, and she made special efforts to cook my favorite meals and to arrange for us to spend time together as a family on weekend outings to parks and museums and other activities that the children enjoyed. I understood that this increased attention was likely driven by her guilt about the affair and her pregnancy, and that she was unconsciously trying to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage while simultaneously carrying on a relationship with another man and preparing to present his child as though it were mine. On Friday of that week, I received an unexpected email message through a professional networking platform from someone whose profile identified her as Isla Vance. And the message said that she had learned through mutual connections that I was married to Elise Cross, who worked as a corporate wellness coordinator, and that Isla needed to speak with me urgently about a matter concerning my wife's professional relationship with Isla's ex-husband, Derek Vance. The message included Isla's phone number and asked me to contact her at my earliest convenience, and it was signed with a brief note saying that Isla understood this was an unusual request, but that she believed I deserved to know certain information about Derek's business practices and his patterns of behavior with female clients. I sat at my desk staring at the email message and trying to decide whether this contact from Derek's ex-wife represented a genuine offer of information that would be useful to my investigation, or whether it was some kind of trap that Derek and Elise had arranged to test whether I was suspicious about their relationship. I searched for Isla Vance's profile on various social media platforms and found that she operated a yoga studio in a neighboring town and that her online presence suggested she was a legitimate business owner with no obvious connection to Derek's fitness business beyond their former marriage. I also found public records showing that Isla and Derek had divorced 18 months earlier, with court documents citing irreconcilable differences as the reason for the dissolution of their marriage, which gave some credibility to Isla's claim that she had information about Derek's behavior patterns that might be relevant to my situation. I decided that the potential value of speaking with someone who had direct personal experience with Derek outweighed the risk that this contact might be part of some elaborate deception, and I called the phone number that Isla had provided in her message. She answered after 2 rings and thanked me for calling so quickly, and she explained that she had learned about Elise's training relationship with Derek through a mutual acquaintance who worked in the corporate wellness industry, and who had mentioned that Derek was providing services to Elise's employer. Isla said that when she had heard Elise's name, she had looked at Elise's social media profiles and had recognized certain patterns in the posts, and the language that Elise used that were similar to patterns she had observed in other female clients who had become romantically involved with Derek during the time when Isla and Derek had still been married. Isla asked me whether I would be willing to meet with her in person to discuss what she knew about Derek's history with clients and his methods of initiating affairs with married women who came to him for fitness training, and I agreed to meet her the following day at a coffee shop that was located approximately halfway between our respective cities. I spent the remainder of that workday thinking about what Isla might tell me during our meeting and whether her information would confirm the conclusions I had already reached based on my own investigation, or whether she would reveal aspects of Derek's behavior that I had not yet discovered through my review of location data and financial records and social media posts. That evening, when I arrived home, I found that Elise had prepared an elaborate dinner and had set the dining room table with candles and our good dishes. And when I asked what the special occasion was, she said that she just wanted to celebrate our family and show her appreciation for how supportive I had been during what she described as a stressful period at her job. The children were excited about the fancy dinner setup, and they chattered happily throughout the meal about their school activities and their plans for the weekend. And I participated in the conversation while observing Elise carefully to see whether there were any signs that she suspected I was investigating her activities or that she was preparing to tell me about the pregnancy. After dinner, I helped Elise clean up the kitchen while the children played in the living room, and as we were loading the dishwasher, she turned to me and said that she had something important to tell me and that she hoped I would be happy about the news she wanted to share. I felt my pulse quicken as I realized that this might be the moment when she revealed the pregnancy, and I forced myself to maintain a calm expression and to wait for her to continue speaking. She took a deep breath and told me that she thought she might be pregnant and that she had taken a home pregnancy test earlier in the week that had shown a positive result, and she said that she had scheduled an appointment with a new obstetrician for the following Tuesday to confirm the pregnancy and to begin prenatal care. I responded with what I hoped was appropriate surprise and happiness, and I hugged Elise and told her that this was wonderful news and that I was excited about the possibility of having another child, even though we had previously agreed that our family was complete with 2 children. Elise seemed relieved by my positive reaction, and she said that she knew the pregnancy was unexpected, given our earlier decision about family size, but that she felt this was meant to be and that she hoped I would be willing to embrace this new chapter in our lives. I assured her that I was fully supportive and that we would work together to prepare for the new baby's arrival, and internally I felt disgusted by my own performance of enthusiasm for a pregnancy that I knew with medical certainty could not be mine. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, I returned to my home office and added notes to my timeline spreadsheet, documenting the date when Elise had revealed the pregnancy to me and recording the specific language she had used about the pregnancy being unexpected and about hoping I would be happy despite our earlier agreement about family planning. I also made notes about the fact that she had claimed to have taken the pregnancy test earlier in the week, which contradicted my knowledge that she had actually purchased and used a test more than 10 days earlier, based on the receipt I had found in the bathroom trash, which meant that she had been concealing the pregnancy from me for at least a week and possibly longer before finally deciding to share the news. I prepared a list of questions that I wanted to ask Isla Vance during our meeting the following day, and I organized these questions around 3 main topics that I wanted to understand better based on the information I had gathered so far. The first topic was Derek's history of involvement with married female clients and whether there was a consistent pattern in how he initiated and maintained these relationships while presenting them as legitimate professional training arrangements. The second topic was whether Derek had used similar tactics with other clients, such as scheduling training sessions at his residential condominium or arranging weekend retreats that were presented as wellness activities, but that actually served as romantic getaways. The third topic was whether Isla had any knowledge of Derek having children with any of his former clients, or whether there were other women who had become pregnant as a result of their affairs with him while they were still married to other men. I printed my list of questions and placed it in a folder along with copies of the key pieces of evidence I had collected, including the fitness app location screenshots and the restaurant charge receipts, and the social media posts showing the matching mountain retreat photos from June. I packed this folder into my laptop bag so that I would have it available during my meeting with Isla, and I also made sure that my phone was fully charged so that I could take notes or record information during our conversation if Isla provided details that I needed to document precisely for potential future legal proceedings. I woke early on Saturday morning and told Elise that I needed to go into the hospital for a few hours to deal with an urgent records audit issue that had come up late the previous afternoon, and she accepted this explanation without question because my job frequently required me to handle unexpected problems on weekends when normal staffing was reduced and administrative issues could not wait until Monday to be resolved. I drove to the coffee shop where I had arranged to meet Isla Vance, and I arrived 15 minutes early so that I could choose a table in a quiet corner where we would be able to have a private conversation without being overheard by other customers or interrupted by staff members clearing tables and refilling coffee cups. Isla arrived exactly at the scheduled time, and I recognized her immediately from the photographs I had seen on her yoga studio's website, and she greeted me with a sad smile that suggested she understood how difficult and painful this meeting must be for me given what I was presumably learning about my wife's relationship with her former husband. We ordered coffee and settled into our corner table, and Isla began by thanking me for agreeing to meet with her and explaining that she had debated for several days about whether to reach out to me because she knew that inserting herself into my personal situation was a violation of normal boundaries and could be seen as vindictive behavior by a bitter ex-wife who was trying to damage her former husband's current relationships. Isla told me that she had ultimately decided to contact me because she had been through a very similar experience herself 3 years earlier, when she had discovered that Derek was having an affair with one of his personal training clients, who was a married woman in her early 30s, and that the discovery of that affair had led to the dissolution of Isla's marriage to Derek and had caused her enormous emotional pain and financial hardship as she had worked to rebuild her life and establish her own business, independent of any connection to Derek's fitness enterprise. She said that after her divorce was finalized, she had gradually learned through conversations with other women in the local fitness community that Derek had a pattern of pursuing married female clients, and that the affair she had discovered was not an isolated incident, but rather was part of a consistent behavioral pattern that Derek had maintained throughout their marriage and had apparently continued after their divorce. I asked Isla to tell me more about the specific tactics that Derek used to initiate and maintain these affairs with married clients, and she explained that Derek had developed what she described as a very effective approach that began with identifying women who appeared to be unhappy or dissatisfied in their marriages and who seemed receptive to attention and validation from someone outside their primary relationship. Isla said that Derek would spend the first several weeks of a training relationship building trust and rapport with these women by being an exceptionally attentive and supportive coach who listened carefully to their concerns and frustrations and who made them feel understood and valued in ways that they apparently were not experiencing at home with their husbands. Once Derek had established this foundation of trust and emotional connection, Isla explained, he would gradually begin introducing more personal topics into their conversations during training sessions and would start asking questions about the client's marriage and her level of satisfaction with her husband's attentiveness and his understanding of her needs and desires. Derek would position himself as someone who genuinely cared about the client's overall wellness and happiness rather than just her physical fitness, and he would frame his questions about her marriage as part of a holistic approach to health that recognized the importance of emotional fulfillment and relationship satisfaction as components of total well-being. Isla said that Derek was particularly skilled at identifying women whose husbands traveled frequently for work or who worked demanding schedules that kept them away from home during evenings and weekends, because these women often felt lonely and neglected and were therefore more vulnerable to Derek's attention and his implicit message that they deserved better treatment than they were receiving from their absent or preoccupied spouses. Derek would offer to schedule training sessions during times when the husband was away so that the woman would not have to feel guilty about taking time away from family responsibilities, and he would sometimes suggest that they meet at his condominium rather than at the gym if the woman expressed concerns about being seen at the fitness studio by neighbors or acquaintances who might mention the training sessions to her husband. I pulled out my folder of evidence and showed Isla the fitness app screenshots documenting the 3 training sessions that Elise had logged at Derek's condominium address during the week in mid-June when I had been traveling for a conference. And Isla nodded and said that this pattern was completely consistent with what she had observed in Derek's previous affairs, and that the transition from gym-based training to residential sessions was typically the point at which the relationship shifted from emotional connection to physical intimacy. She explained that Derek would frame these residential training sessions as being more private and personalized than what could be offered in a busy gym environment, and he would tell clients that training at his home would allow them to work on more advanced techniques without feeling self-conscious about their form or their appearance in front of other gym members. Isla told me that during her marriage to Derek, she had discovered evidence of at least 3 separate affairs that he had conducted with married clients, and that in each case the affair had followed the same general pattern of emotional grooming, followed by residential training sessions, followed by weekend retreats that were presented to the client's husband as wellness workshops or professional development opportunities. She said that 2 of these affairs had resulted in the client leaving her husband and attempting to establish a permanent relationship with Derek, but that in both cases Derek had ended the relationship once the woman was divorced because he said he was not interested in being anyone's rebound partner and did not want the responsibility of helping someone rebuild her life after leaving a marriage. I asked Isla whether she knew of any cases where Derek's affairs had resulted in pregnancies, and her expression became even more somber as she told me that she was aware of at least one situation in which a married client had become pregnant during her affair with Derek and had initially believed that the baby was her husband's child because she had continued to have occasional intimate relations with her husband during the same period when she was seeing Derek. Isla said that in that particular case, the woman had given birth to the baby and had maintained the fiction that her husband was the biological father for almost 2 years before a medical issue with the child had required genetic testing that revealed the husband could not possibly be the father based on blood type incompatibility. Isla explained that when that revelation had occurred, the woman's marriage had immediately collapsed, and she had contacted Derek to tell him that he was the biological father of her child. But Derek had refused to acknowledge paternity and had told the woman that she needed to resolve the situation on her own because he had no interest in being involved in raising a child with someone he no longer had a relationship with. Isla said that as far as she knew, Derek had never provided any financial support for that child and had never met the child in person, and that the woman had eventually married someone else who had agreed to adopt the child and serve as its legal father, despite knowing that the child had been conceived during an affair. I asked Isla whether she would be willing to provide me with contact information for any of the other women who had been involved with Derek so that I could speak with them about their experiences and potentially gather additional evidence about his pattern of behavior, but Isla said that she did not feel comfortable sharing other people's private information without their consent, and that she had only reached out to me directly because she felt a moral obligation to warn me about what I was likely dealing with based on what she had observed during her marriage to Derek. She did offer to write a signed statement describing what she knew about Derek's history with married clients and his methods of initiating affairs, and she said that she would be willing to testify about these matters if I ended up pursuing legal action against Elise, or if custody issues arose that required evidence about Elise's judgment and decision-making during the affair. I thanked Isla for meeting with me and for sharing information that confirmed and extended what I had already discovered through my own investigation, and I asked her whether she thought Derek was aware that I might know about his relationship with Elise, or whether he was operating under the assumption that the affair remained completely hidden from me. Isla said that in her experience, Derek tended to be overconfident about his ability to maintain secrecy, and that he often underestimated the intelligence and investigative capabilities of the husbands whose wives he was pursuing, and she thought it was highly unlikely that Derek had any idea that I was documenting evidence and preparing to expose the affair in a way that would have professional and social consequences for both him and Elise. As we were preparing to leave the coffee shop, Isla mentioned one additional piece of information that she thought might be relevant to my situation, which was that Derek's fitness studio held several corporate wellness contracts with local companies, including the contract with Elise's employer, and that these contracts represented a significant portion of Derek's annual revenue and business stability. Isla explained that the corporate contracts typically included ethics clauses that prohibited vendors from engaging in personal relationships with employees of the client companies, and that a violation of these ethics clauses could result in immediate termination of the contract and could damage Derek's reputation in the corporate wellness industry to the point where he might have difficulty maintaining his business. I drove home from the coffee shop feeling that my meeting with Isla had provided valuable confirmation of the conclusions I had already reached about Derek's character and his patterns of behavior, and I also felt that I now had access to a witness who could provide credible testimony about Derek's history if legal proceedings became necessary. I spent the rest of that Saturday afternoon playing with my children at a neighborhood park, while Elise stayed home saying she needed to rest because she was feeling fatigued from the early stages of pregnancy, and I found myself watching my son and daughter run and climb and laugh with their friends while feeling profound sadness about the fact that their family structure was going to be fundamentally altered in ways that would affect them for the rest of their lives, regardless of how carefully I tried to minimize the disruption and trauma. I spent the following week continuing to document Elise's activities while also beginning to make preliminary plans for how I would eventually expose the affair and its consequences in a way that would be both emotionally satisfying and legally advantageous, which even for my position in what would inevitably become a contentious separation and custody negotiation. I had several phone conversations with Graham Holt, the family law attorney whose name I had found through a professional referral service that catered to hospital administrators and other healthcare professionals, and Graham helped me understand the strategic considerations that would govern the timing and the manner of my confrontation with Elise about the pregnancy and her relationship with Derek Vance. Graham explained that while I had extremely strong evidence that the child Elise was carrying could not possibly be mine based on my vasectomy and the medical documentation from Dr. Kwan, I would still need to be careful about how I presented this information publicly because courts and mediators who handle custody disputes often look unfavorably on spouses who seem vindictive or who appear to be using children as weapons in marital conflicts. He advised me that the most effective approach would be to present the evidence in a calm and factual manner that demonstrated I was motivated by a concern for truth and fairness, rather than by anger or a desire for revenge, and he suggested that I should avoid making inflammatory accusations about Elise's character or moral fitness as a parent, because such accusations would likely backfire and make me appear unreasonable or controlling. Graham and I discussed various possible venues and contexts for exposing the pregnancy fraud, and he initially recommended that I confront Elise privately and give her an opportunity to acknowledge the affair and to agree to a separation arrangement that would protect my financial interests and my custody rights with regard to our 2 existing children. I explained to Graham that I was not interested in a private confrontation because I believed that Elise would simply construct another set of lies and would attempt to manipulate the narrative in ways that would make it difficult for me to prove the truth to family members and friends and professional contacts who might be called upon to provide character testimony or custody recommendations in future legal proceedings. I told Graham that I wanted to expose the affair in a public setting where there would be multiple witnesses who could verify what was said and what evidence was presented, and I explained that Elise's sister Mara had recently asked me whether I would be willing to help organize a baby shower for Elise that would be held at a country club venue in late September and would include approximately 40 guests comprising family members from both sides and close friends, and some of Elise's work colleagues. Graham initially expressed concern about using a baby shower as the venue for exposing the pregnancy fraud because he thought it might appear cruel or calculated in ways that would damage my reputation and my standing with the family members who would be present, but I argued that the baby shower was actually the perfect setting because it was an event that was explicitly organized around celebrating the pregnancy and welcoming the new baby, which meant that questions about paternity were entirely appropriate and relevant to the occasion. I explained to Graham that I planned to volunteer to handle the audio-visual setup for the baby shower and to prepare a slideshow presentation that would ostensibly celebrate our family's journey toward welcoming a 3rd child, but that would actually present the medical evidence and timeline documentation that proved I could not be the biological father. Graham listened to my plan and asked several questions about the specific content I intended to include in the presentation and about how I would handle the moment when Elise and the assembled guests realized what was happening, and after considering the details, he agreed that this approach had certain strategic advantages because it would create a clear public record of Elise's deception and would make it difficult for her to subsequently claim that the pregnancy disclosure had been handled unfairly or without giving her an opportunity to respond. During this same period, I received an email notification from our shared cloud photo storage service informing me that the system had automatically generated a memory collection based on photos that had been uploaded 6 months earlier, and when I opened the notification, I found that the memory collection included several images from Elise's June mountain retreat that I had previously seen when I was searching her social media posts. I clicked on one of the images to view its full metadata information, and I discovered that in addition to the date and location stamps that were visible in the photo properties, there was also information about which device had been used to capture the image and what other photos had been taken in the same session before and after this particular shot. I spent nearly an hour clicking through the complete set of photos that had been taken during Elise's June retreat weekend, and I found several images that she had apparently chosen not to share publicly on social media, but that had been automatically uploaded to our shared cloud storage because her phone was configured to back up all photos, regardless of whether she had marked them for public posting. Among these private images was a photograph that showed Elise and Derek standing together on a hiking trail with Derek's arm around Elise's shoulders, and another photograph that appeared to have been taken inside a hotel room or cabin and showed 2 wine glasses and a table set for an intimate dinner with candles and flowers. I felt a surge of satisfaction when I discovered these images because they provided direct visual evidence of Elise and Derek, together in a romantic context during the time frame when conception most likely occurred based on the pregnancy timeline that I had calculated from the due date information that Elise had shared with me. I immediately downloaded all of these images to my encrypted personal storage and also made note of the complete metadata associated with each photograph, including the precise timestamps and the GPS coordinates and the device identifiers that proved the photos had been taken with Elise's phone. I added this information to my evidence spreadsheet and began planning how I would incorporate these images into the presentation I was preparing for the baby shower, because I realized that showing actual photographs of Elise and Derek together would be much more powerful and undeniable than simply presenting location data and financial records that required the audience to make inferences about what had been happening. Later that week, Elise attended her first prenatal appointment with the new obstetrician she had selected, And when she returned home that evening, she showed me an ultrasound image that the doctor had given her and told me that the pregnancy was progressing normally and that the due date had been confirmed as March 2nd based on measurements of the developing fetus. I asked Elise whether I could keep a copy of the ultrasound image so that I could share it with my parents who lived several states away and who would want to see evidence of their new grandchild, and Elise smiled and handed me the image and suggested that I could take a photo of it with my phone and send it to them immediately. I photographed the ultrasound image and then examined it more carefully while Elise was in another room preparing dinner, and I noticed that there was a small label at the bottom of the image that showed the name of the medical practice where the scan had been performed along with a patient identification number and the date of the appointment. I realized that if I examined the metadata from the ultrasound photos that I had found in our shared cloud storage from several weeks earlier, I might be able to determine whether those earlier images had come from the same medical practice or whether Elise had visited a different facility for a preliminary scan before establishing care with the obstetrician she had told me about. I returned to my laptop and searched through the cloud storage for the ultrasound images I had seen previously, and when I examined their metadata, I discovered that the location stamps showed they had been captured at Derek's condominium address rather than at any medical facility, which suggested that Elise had brought printed ultrasound images to Derek's home and had photographed them there, presumably to share the pregnancy news with him and to discuss their situation in private. This discovery confirmed that Derek was aware of the pregnancy and was involved in discussions about how to handle the situation, and it also suggested that Elise and Derek had continued to meet privately at his condominium even after the initial phase of their affair, and even after Elise had discovered that she was pregnant. I took screenshots showing the ultrasound image metadata with the location stamp indicating Derek's address, and I added these screenshots to my evidence collection along with a note explaining that the images proved Elise had been sharing pregnancy information with Derek in a private setting rather than simply conducting a professional training relationship, as she would presumably claim if confronted about the nature of her connection to him. I also made a note to myself that I should request copies of the complete medical records from Elise's obstetrician after the baby shower exposure occurred, because those records would include information about when Elise had first sought prenatal care and what information she had provided to her doctor about her sexual history and her relationship status. On Friday afternoon of that week, I contacted Mara and told her that I wanted to help make Elise's baby shower special and meaningful, and I offered to take responsibility for creating a multimedia presentation that would be shown during the event to celebrate our family's story and to share our excitement about welcoming a new baby. Mara seemed pleased by this offer and told me that she thought a slideshow presentation would be a lovely addition to the shower program, and she said that she would coordinate with the country club to ensure that the event space had a projector and screen that I could use for the presentation. I thanked Mara for her help with organizing the shower and told her that I was looking forward to creating something that would really capture the significance of this moment in our family's life. I spent that weekend beginning to assemble the slideshow presentation that I would show at the baby shower, and I created an outline that would begin with innocent family photos from earlier years and would gradually introduce the medical documentation and timeline evidence that proved the pregnancy could not be mine. I decided that the presentation should be structured to build suspense and to delay the revelation until the audience was fully engaged and expecting a conventional celebration, because I wanted to maximize the dramatic impact of the exposure and to ensure that everyone present would remember exactly what evidence had been shown and what questions had been asked. I spent the next 2 weeks refining the slideshow presentation and coordinating with Mara about the logistics of the baby shower while continuing to maintain my facade of being an excited and supportive husband who was looking forward to welcoming a third child into our family. Elise seemed to relax somewhat as the weeks passed without any indication that I suspected anything unusual about her pregnancy, and she became increasingly focused on planning nursery decorations and researching baby equipment and discussing names that we might consider for the new arrival. I participated in all of these conversations with what I hoped was convincing enthusiasm, and I made suggestions about paint colors and furniture arrangements while internally feeling disgusted by the elaborate performance that both of us were maintaining for entirely different reasons. During this period, I made several visits to the country club where the baby shower would be held, and I met with the event coordinator to discuss the audio-visual capabilities of the room where our party would take place and to ensure that I would have everything I needed to present my slideshow effectively to the 40 guests who were expected to attend. The event coordinator showed me the built-in projection system and explained how to connect my laptop to the room's display equipment, and she also showed me where the lighting controls were located so that I could dim the room appropriately when it was time to begin the presentation. I tested the equipment during one of these visits by loading a sample slideshow onto my laptop and running through the entire sequence to verify that all of the images would display clearly and that the text overlays I had created would be readable from the back of the room where some guests would be seated. I also worked with Mara to arrange the seating chart for the shower in a way that would ensure maximum impact when the presentation reached its crucial revelations about the pregnancy timeline and the medical impossibility of my being the biological father. I suggested to Mara that we should seat Elise at the center of a head table where she would be clearly visible to all of the guests and where she would be facing the projection screen so that she would be forced to watch the slideshow along with everyone else rather than being able to avoid looking at the evidence as it was presented. I also made sure that both sets of parents would be seated in prominent positions near the head table so that their reactions would be visible to other guests and would add to the weight of social judgment that would fall on Elise once the truth became clear. Mara asked me at one point during our planning conversations whether I wanted to invite any of Elise's work colleagues to the shower, since Elise had mentioned that she was close to several people at her office and thought they might enjoy celebrating with her. I told Mara that I thought it would be appropriate to include some of Elise's professional contacts, and I specifically suggested that we should invite representatives from the corporate wellness vendor companies that worked with Elise's employer, because that would acknowledge the professional dimension of Elise's work in fitness and health promotion. Mara agreed that this was a thoughtful idea, and she asked me whether I knew the names of any specific vendors who should be included on the guest list. I told Mara that I knew Elise worked closely with a personal trainer named Derek Vance, who operated a fitness studio that had contracts with her employer, and I suggested that Derek might appreciate being invited, since he had apparently been instrumental in helping Elise maintain her fitness routine during the early stages of her pregnancy when many women struggle with fatigue and nausea. Mara said she would add Derek to the guest list and would send him an invitation along with the other professional contacts we had identified, and I felt a cold satisfaction knowing that Derek would be present in the room when I revealed the evidence that would destroy both his professional reputation and his relationship with Elise. I also reached back out to Isla Vance and asked whether she would be willing to attend the baby shower as a representative of the yoga and wellness community, and I explained that her presence would be valuable as a witness to what occurred during the event, and that she might be called upon to provide testimony about Derek's patterns of behavior if legal proceedings became necessary afterward. Isla was initially reluctant to attend, because she said that being in the same room with Derek would be emotionally difficult for her, but I assured her that she would not need to interact with Derek directly, and that her role would simply be to observe and to be available afterward if questions arose about Derek's history with other clients. Isla eventually agreed to attend after I explained how important it was to have an independent witness who could corroborate the pattern of behavior that connected Derek's affair with Elise to his previous affairs with other married clients. During the final week before the baby shower, I made one last addition to my evidence collection when I discovered through the shared fitness tracking app that Elise had logged another training session at Derek's condominium address on an afternoon when her calendar showed that she was supposed to be attending a vendor meeting at her office. I took a screenshot of the location data and added it to my presentation slideshow as evidence that Elise and Derek had continued to meet privately at his residence even during the late stages of her pregnancy when such meetings could not plausibly be explained as legitimate fitness training sessions. I also noted that this most recent condominium visit had occurred less than a week before the baby shower, which suggested that Elise felt confident enough in her deception that she was not even bothering to be particularly careful about concealing her ongoing relationship with Derek from me or from anyone else who might be monitoring her activities through the shared digital accounts that we maintained. On the evening before the baby shower, I loaded my completed presentation onto my laptop and reviewed it one final time to ensure that every slide was properly formatted and that the sequence of revelations would unfold in a logical and compelling manner that would make it impossible for Elise to deny the truth or to construct an alternative explanation for the evidence I was presenting. The slideshow began with cheerful family photos from our wedding and from the births of our 2 existing children, and these opening slides were accompanied by upbeat music and text captions about the joy of family and the excitement of welcoming new life. The presentation then transitioned to slides showing the timeline of Elise's current pregnancy, and these slides included the ultrasound image that Elise had given me along with information about the confirmed due date and the calculated conception window. The crucial turning point in the presentation came when I introduced a slide showing my vasectomy receipt from 4 years earlier, and this slide was followed immediately by Dr. Kwan's medical verification letter confirming that the procedure had been successful and that my sperm count had been 0 at the post-operative follow-up examination. The next several slides presented a detailed timeline showing that conception would have occurred in mid-June during the exact period when I had been traveling for a work conference, and I included copies of my travel receipts and hotel confirmations to prove that I had been physically absent from our home during the entire conception window. The presentation then showed the fitness app screenshots documenting Elise's 3 training sessions at Derek's condominium during my absence, followed by the social media posts showing the matching mountain retreat photos that proved Elise and Derek had been together at a romantic resort during the same time frame. The final slides in the presentation included the ultrasound metadata showing that Elise had photographed her medical images at Derek's residence, and the restaurant receipts from our joint credit card showing that Elise had been dining with someone at establishments near Derek's gym during times when she claimed to be working alone at her office. The very last slide was a simple text screen with no images or decorative elements, and it displayed a single question in large white letters against a black background. Given this medical timeline and this evidence, who is the biological father of this baby? I closed my laptop and sat in my home office feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread about what would happen the following day when I presented this slideshow to 40 witnesses, including both families and close friends and professional colleagues and Derek himself. I knew that the exposure would be devastating for Elise both personally and professionally, and I knew that it would create profound disruption and pain for our two existing children, who would have to process the news that their mother had betrayed their father and had lied to everyone about the paternity of their expected sibling. I also knew that the exposure would have serious consequences for Derek's business, because the violation of ethics clauses in his corporate wellness contracts would almost certainly result in the termination of those contracts and would damage his reputation in ways that would make it difficult for him to attract new clients or to maintain his current business relationships. Despite my awareness of all these consequences, I felt certain that public exposure was the right approach because it would create an undeniable record of what had occurred and would make it impossible for Elise to rewrite the narrative or to claim later that I had misunderstood the situation or had reacted disproportionately to innocent circumstances. I believed that the truth deserved to be told in a setting where it could not be minimized or explained away, and I believed that the people who had been invited to celebrate what they thought was a joyous family occasion deserved to know that they were being asked to participate in a fraud that would have continued indefinitely if I had not discovered the pregnancy test in our bathroom trash and had not taken the time to document the evidence that proved Elise's deception. I went to bed that night and lay awake for several hours listening to Elise's quiet breathing beside me and thinking about how different our lives would be after the next day's events had unfolded and after the truth had been revealed to everyone who mattered in our social and family circles. I thought about the conversations I would need to have with our children to help them understand what had happened and why their family structure was changing, and I thought about the legal proceedings that would follow as we negotiated custody arrangements and financial settlements and all of the other practical details that accompany the end of a marriage. I eventually fell into a restless sleep and woke early the next morning feeling alert and focused and ready to execute the plan that I had been developing and refining over the past several weeks since discovering the pregnancy test that had set all of these events into motion. I arrived at the country club 2 hours before the scheduled start time for the baby shower so that I would have sufficient opportunity to set up my laptop and test the projection system one final time and ensure that everything was ready for the presentation that would expose Elise's affair and the paternity fraud that she had been perpetrating since discovering her pregnancy. The event coordinator met me at the entrance and showed me into the room where the shower would be held, and I was pleased to see that the space had been decorated exactly as Mara and I had discussed, with pink and blue balloons and streamers and a large banner that said, "Congratulations on the new arrival," hanging across the back wall.